So back in October 2020, Ubisoft released Watch Dogs Legion, this being the third entry in the franchise after Watch Dogs 2 back in 2016. Now 2020 wasn't the best year for game releases in terms of backlash from fans, whether that be the game releasing in a buggy mess like Cyberpunk 2077, or players simply not enjoying how a game was executed like The Last of Us Part 2. Now both of these complaints were also followed on in Watch Dogs Legion, bad performance and not everyone but a good amount of people not liking this unique and different take on the series, which I'll get into. So I think it's a good time to give you all an in-depth review on if this game is worth playing now. In terms of gameplay, arguably the most prominent and biggest change in this game compared to previous entries is the feature of you being able to play as pretty much anyone rather than having a fixed protagonist and one only. This time you have the ability to recruit the people of London to DedSec, who I'll talk more about later in the story. So yes, you can choose from pretty much anyone, though it doesn't always perform the same with each one. Some of them may need more convincing into being a part of the team and may take a little longer. I'm very aware that some people won't like the sound of this, as it completely strays away from the usual single protagonist you control, like in the last two games, Aiden Pierce and Marcus Holloway. I can see why, because Aiden Pierce, for example, is a really good character and is also one of my favourite protagonists. So when playing through Legion, it definitely feels odd not being able to really connect with the main character, and with there not being a set one. It's quite obvious they won't be as in-depth in the story, and you don't see any character development from them, which is quite important when trying to make an engaging game and more so a good story. We've seen this quite a lot in many Ubisoft titles, like in Far Cry 2 where you could choose from a handful of characters rather than just the one, and then in Far Cry 5 where it's a fixed protagonist but again they don't say a word. So at first it may seem like a quick turn off, but the idea of having the freedom to recruit anyone and build up your own team, I found it pretty cool, as it isn't just the same NPC every time. Well, actually PCs I guess, because they're all playable. Some are stronger than others and you can compare which ones are the best. There's a good set of upgrades as well to choose through the tech menu for those of you who want to really make sure. A good one being the Deep Profiler for 25 tech points, providing you with way more information on the people you find and want to recruit, this being recruitment leads and their routine, so you're aware if they have any rivals and the people you meet. Some of the best ones being the Beekeeper, Paramedic, Hitman, etc., who are way more helpful than the average ones you commonly find. The Beekeeper, for example, can send out a swarm of robot bees who target enemies, which is of course unique to them, and you wouldn't really know that if you didn't look into recruiting them, and they're simply located around the parks of London. The Hitman is most probably the best one, which you'd expect from the name. They come with instant takedowns, combat rolling to roll and reload at the same time, and a extra sidearm. So with this whole mechanic you can switch up gameplay whenever you like by swapping different recruits and having a fresh take on combat that varies with each one. They can vary from amateur to professional to show which ones are stronger. Again, when looking into the recruits information, some may have bad attitudes. The more thumbs down they have, the more cautious you must be, and you should just stray away from them because they can turn their back on you and try to harm your team. And it's all a progressive system, with you being able to explore and research different people to find the best recruits for your team. And yes, it may take away from the main protagonist connection to immerse you more into the story, but for gameplay I personally think it's great and a lot of fun, making the game very unique. There is some limitations, like out of the huge number of NPCs, only 45 recruits can be held at a time, which I still think is pretty good, all being playable of course, and then there is a cooldown if they get injured. The last aspect to mention on recruitments is the introduction of assassins in Watch Dogs, with the crossover DLC to then be used as recruits, again allowing for a great collaboration between the two Ubisoft franchises and executed pretty well, which I can't really see how they would do if they didn't have this recruit system, implementing the iconic hidden blade to use in gameplay, but also hidden bullets and darts. They can actually be disguised as a soldier as well. You can use the Eagle drone, pretty much all of the Assassin's Creed abilities transferred into Watch Dogs with this modern day setting of London. A very important feature of Watch Dogs is the idea of hacking, which has also been more standout in Legion, especially with the array of gadgets to unlock this time, and then being able to buy perk upgrades for those gadgets, which make this typical hacking mechanic more fun and diverse. These gadgets provide a different way of taking on each mission every time, allowing for lots of replayability. There are some which pretty much force you to use a certain gadget, as that's the only possible way. The most common one being the spider bot. In my opinion, I enjoyed using it a lot, but I can see why some players may have liked less of the spider bot missions. Luckily, a good amount of them are flexible in terms of how you want to play the mission. You can basically decide what you want to do with your choice of gadget. Now in terms of what the spider bot actually does, it's of course a lot smaller and agile than a human, so it can fit into tight spaces like vents for example, or even get up high places because it can jump high if you upgrade it. With the double jump perk, it can hack objects, disable security systems, and even take down guards, which had a really good animation to them as well. There's also the cargo drone, which has a large surface area for your recruit to stand on top of it and then hijack it and ride it around the city to then either access higher places, allow for a quick escape, or yes, just to simply traverse around London. I just think with the recruit system and how much flexibility there is with that, and then combine that with the huge selection of gadgets as you've seen, it really allows for a tactical gameplay style which can be different in each mission or playthrough. There's even a non-lethal paintball gun to use on enemies that obviously won't kill them. Just such a fun set of gadgets that we didn't really see as much of before. Now, as I mentioned, some of the missions don't let you use as many gadgets and will just be you going around hacking systems and downloading data, sometimes not even having any enemies to attack. These are mostly in the recruitment missions, which I must say do sometimes get repetitive, which is a shame. Luckily it isn't all of them, but there is a handful of missions that feel near enough the same every time, because there isn't an awful lot to do, even if you've tried using other gadgets or recruits, because they are that minimal. But as an overall, I definitely wouldn't say the gameplay is like that. There's also parcel drop-off missions, which are just side missions to gain rewards like tech points and e-tokens, and it's basically how it sounds. You deliver a parcel from a drop-off point, which yes is a bit boring, but it doesn't have to be done. Now I'd like to talk about the world of Watch Dogs Legion, which if you couldn't tell by now is all set in the city of London, which instantly makes it one of my favourite worlds just because of that setting alone. So I might be a little biased on this bit as I am from England, but I always think it's so cool when a game is set in the place you've actually been to or live in. It already has so much more connection, as well as there not being an awful lot of modern day London settings in games. Especially with this game being released only 3 years ago, the visuals make it seem even more immersive. They did a very good job at creating a futuristic capture of London, not too far-fetched as it's only set in 2029, 6 years time, so you see all the famous landmarks the setting is filled with, which was so cool to see. Big Ben, the London Eye, the Shard, Tower Bridge, Buckingham Palace, Piccadilly Circus, the list goes on. And in this game London is taken over and controlled by Albion, who as I mentioned I'll go into more detail about with the story, though this means it's prominent across London and they let everyone know by hacking almost everything to spread their message across, with screens and holographic advertisements slapped on the edge of buildings, implementing strict laws and high security systems. The lighting in this game is incredible and one of my favourite parts about the world building, which I would say is pretty key when the setting is filled with this much coloured lighting and lit up screens, just like in Cyberpunk. But even when up close on a computer or hacking system, and the way the red light reflects off you, it looks great and immerses you into the world. Now with not only you controlling every resident of London, but also the city just being so busy as it's the capital, the population density is high with so many people going about their day, walking in crowds along the pavements and crossing roads, with you being able to scan everyone and find out information. It makes the world feel so alive. The same goes with the variety of actions people are doing, like protests on the side of the road or in front of important landmarks to give off the fact that they want freedom after the city has been taken over. Even small details of people doing small jobs like watering plants, sweeping up, beekeeping, etc., down to the variety in outfit designs, with some really futuristic and trendy set of clothes, each one wearing something different, and even you can of course customize your character with a huge selection of clothes to pick up and mix and match. To unlock more choices you actually have to visit that clothing brand's shop, most of them being in Piccadilly, and then once you've interacted with it, it will stay in your locker at your hub and you can use the currency of e-tokens that you can collect from missions and your overall progress in the game. The customization carries on a bit in the weapons, where you can pick different gun skins, but that's about it. It would have been nice to see more, especially with how much there is in clothing, but I'll talk about the weapons more later in gunplay. Now the set of dialogue with the world's characters is actually pretty good. Me being from England, they've definitely exaggerated some of the voices of a Londoner and the phrases used, but it adds a bit of humour and makes each conversation interesting, but doesn't really mean it's going to be as immersive, as yes they are technically main characters as you play as them, but at the end of the day they're still NPCs, so the voice acting is never going to feel authentic and captivating because it doesn't sound totally real, like someone has actually done voice acting for each and every character, which is another potential downside to the recruiting system rather than a fixed protagonist. A very good majority of the voices and lines don't fit at all to the character speaking. Now the driving mechanics are really fun to use and are quite easy to control for the most part, but maybe a bit too easy, as in they feel too fast when turning, as in it jolts way too quickly when turning, which of course isn't really that realistic. For a giant city like this and the amount of roads there are, it would have been nice to make the vehicles feel like they have a bit of weight and grip to them that varies with each car, and make them look how an actual car plays out when turning corners, for example. In terms of the look and design of vehicles, they're quite varied, with some really clean looking looking ones. They give off that modern look, some a bit more exaggerated than others. There's also tons of collectibles you find in the world, like audio files, relics, masks, etc. Most of them come from just doing main story missions, like the audio logs, but there's also others dotted around in London. The masks, for example, are all found in the boroughs. The attention to detail in the world is great, with each area you visit filled with a variety of intricate prop sets and objects, from the decorations on the side of buildings and designs of posters or logos, that are all unique to each shop or restaurant. They could have just easily copied and pasted. Tons of litter scattered in alleyways and on the pavement, next to bins. They did an amazing job with the detail. The same in the architecture, and was just so immersive when simply exploring the city. Definitely one of my favourite video game worlds. As I said, it might be a bit biased. Overall, I think Watch Dogs always do quite well at this. Now let's focus on the story of Watch Dogs Legion, which I would say isn't too convoluted. As I mentioned, we're a part of DedSec, and in the opening scene we find out that the Houses of Parliament have had bombs planted in them with the DedSec name and logo printed on them to make it look like we did it, but it was actually Zero Day, a hacker and terrorist group, the rivals of DedSec. And this terrorist attack was what implemented Albion PMC through the law enforcement of London, which is what starts the chaos and opens the game's story. So the overall goal is to rebuild DedSec after them being framed, with DedSec against Albion, as they've now taken control of London and started using these very strict laws and high security. Therefore they see them as a threat to London's freedom. So you plan to expose them and liberate London with the use of high level tech and information to do so. But DedSec also have rivalry with other factions and criminal orcs. You slowly start to uncover the truth of the terrorist attack and put an end to the corruption of London. Yes, the characters, and more so the removal of a main protagonist, does take down the story a bit by you not being able to connect with the character like the other games and feel disconnected from the main story, which was a shame, though I've already mentioned the pros of having a recruitment system instead, and those other characters having poor dialogue just further enhance it. However, the overall plot and goals seem in pretty much all the entries. I'm glad is near enough followed through into Legion, and will always be fun to follow along. And I think everyone can agree, the unique gameplay of Watch Dogs is what makes the game enjoyable, with the story not being anything too crazy in this game, unfortunately, but doesn't make the game bad. Another big complaint at launch was the performance of the game, which is a common aspect of the games I've reviewed, and so far each time, funny enough, over time the company do actually go out of their way to fix and improve the game. The same with Cyberpunk, which is perfect now, No Man's Sky is another, and Watch Dogs Legion did have an awful lot of bugs come out of the gameplay, which is of course going to be a huge turn off as it stripped away the immersion if the game isn't running how it's supposed to be, and now it's for sure been improved since launch 3 years ago. However, I still do notice the odd bug, mainly to do with the NPCs disappearing out of nowhere or teleporting across the screen. Not anything game breaking, and I didn't notice it too much. For other people it might be a bigger issue if you really pick up on them, and in terms of FPS drop it stayed fairly consistent. It's mostly when driving around really fast where there's lots of people, which I sort of expected from Ubisoft, but again, overall it's been fixed for the most part, which I'm glad, as when it launched it was rough. And I think that's where I end my review of Watch Dogs Legion in 2023. I always love this franchise as long as it doesn't completely switch up the formula of the game. Yes, it's a bold move to switch to the recruitment system as your main protagonist, taking away from the story, but it has lots of pros in terms of gameplay, so it's definitely not worth giving the game no chance at all because of it. I still think if they stick with this unique gameplay that make the Watch Dogs games so good, I will still always recommend to almost everyone, unless you for some reason hate the idea of hacking, and even then it isn't the only feature of the gameplay. But also, if that is the case, then you probably won't enjoy any of the entries, and I wouldn't say that this game strays away from what the game once was. I think implementing a lot of new features makes the game fun and more of a fresh side of gameplay. I've played 1 and Legion and thoroughly enjoyed both. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then let me know by tapping that like button down below, and if you like story video games, then that's what this channel is all about, so you can subscribe to the channel if you'd like to. There's also a playlist of a series I've done in the description down below, and lastly, if you'd like to support me by becoming a member of the channel and gain access to various perks, then you can do so by clicking the join button, or if you're on mobile, there's a link in the description. Thank you for your support and watching until the very end. I really appreciate it. That was Watch Dogs Legion. Until next time, bye bye.